Okay, I think I'm getting the green light to go ahead here. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Mitigating COVID-19 and Preserving Angola's Momentum for 2021. My name is Goodrich. I'm a field editor with Africa Oil and Power, and I will be one of your co-moderators today, along with Mr. Verner Ayukegba from the African Energy Chamber. How are you doing, Verner?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Grace. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce this webinar brought to you by the African Energy Chamber and Africa Oil and Power. We have a very strong lineup of speakers for you today who know this industry inside and out. But before we introduce our panelists, I'm just going to go over a few rules for you all, for our audience, on how to engage with this panel. So first off, if you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a few buttons. The first one is the chat box. So that button is there for all of you to chat amongst yourselves. So the latest number we've received is close to 500 viewers who are registered and will be tuning in from all around the world to this webinar. So please do feel free to share where you're tuning in from, as well as your thoughts on today's conversation as it progresses. It's very important for me to note, please do not ask any questions to the panel in this box, as it will not be monitored for this. To ask questions to our panelists, you will also see a dedicated Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please do submit your questions here, as Verner and I will be monitoring it and trying to get in as many of your questions as possible throughout the panel. Additionally, to make this session interactive, we'll also be fielding a few polls throughout the session. So if a box comes up on your monitor, please do weigh in, and we'll be sharing the results of those polls throughout the session. And then the final and third button I'd like to draw your attention to is the hand icon. So this is for members of the media. If you are a participant of the media, please click that button and virtually raise your hand, and someone from the AOP team will accommodate you to be able to ask your questions to our panelists live at the end of the session. The final note is that the session is currently being recorded, and the recording will be made available at the end of the webinar on AOP's YouTube channel. Okay, so now on to our panelists, who it's my pleasure to introduce to you. Our first panelist is Mr. Frederico Correia, oil and gas partner with Deloitte, Angola. Mr. Correia brings 15 years of industry and supply chain experience to today's conversation, 12 of which have been spent working exclusively with energy, resource, and industrial clients across Europe, the US, and Africa. Mr. Correia advises clients on operations and logistics improvements, as well as asset management projects. In Angola, these clients have been the Ministry of Energy and Water, Sonangol Group, Exxon, BP, Statoil, Total, and more. Welcome, Mr. Correia. Where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining from Portugal. My wife is nurse, so I was in Angola when we started the lockdown in Portugal, and she has been escalated to support the public in the public hospital of Braga, and so I'm working in remote work from home and doing the internal stuff with kids. But I expect that everyone is safe, and thank you and very welcome to this webinar. I expect that you will like it.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and thank you to your wife for her service. Next, we are joined by Mr. Adilson Paulo, Country General Manager at Subsea, where Mr. Paulo oversees sales, operations, HSE, business development, the list goes on. Mr. Paulo has over 14 years of experience working in the Angolan energy sector, working with Total, BP, and GE prior to his role at Subsea. Welcome, Mr. Paulo. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to the webinar. I hope you guys enjoy. This will be a more an interactive, I would say, discussion. We are here also to learn from you, and we hope we can contribute with our ideas to make the oil and gas and economy in Angola better for 2021 and onwards. Stay safe, stay home, and let's enjoy this webinar. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. Next up, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sergio Pugliese, Executive President of the Angolan chapter of the African Energy Chamber, where he oversees the implementation of the Chamber's strategy in Angola while managing its investment promotion platform to attract quality investment going into the country. having began his career at Stewart Petroleum in Australia and then moving to BP and Statoil in Angola prior to his work with the Chamber. Sergio is a seasoned entrepreneur and Angolan oil executive, and he's also the managing director of Angola services provider AMIPA, as well as executive chairman for AIDA Corporation. Thank you for joining us, Sergio. Where are you located at the moment?
Good afternoon. Welcome everybody. Thank you very much. I'm currently in Lisbon. I got caught in Lisbon for this one, so I had to stay here. And yeah, I'm looking very much forward to this discussion. You know, we at the Chamber are always advocating for investment attraction, looking at the positive outlook for things, and we are looking forward to give our contribution and talk about what good things we can bring to this. So, and to Angola and attract investment, make promote a narrative for a good climate for everybody. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion, everybody's questions and inputs, and all the panelists also. Let's enjoy this. Yeah.
Thank you. And our final panelist today is Mr. Frederico Costa, CFO at TechnipFMC. After working for 10 years in Portugal in accounting and tax consulting, Mr. Costa came to Angola in 2012 to major multinational consulting firm PKF. And for the past 6 years, has been in the oil and gas sector, first starting at Angola LNG and then moving to French services provider Preciosa Linjevig as CFO, and currently since 2019 as CFO for French American services provider TechnipFMC. Welcome, Mr. Costa. How are you doing?
Hi, Grace. How are you doing?
Very well.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you all for attending, for all the attendees. Let's hope that today we can share a lot of our experiences and be a very learning stepstone to next steps going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Verner. Verner is Senior Vice President with the African Energy Chamber, where he leads the organization's international outreach and public policy initiatives, working with governments and various stakeholders to create policies that ease investment into Africa's energy sector. He is also the director at Joburg-based DMWA Resources, where he heads the firm's energy and financial services consulting practice. So Verner, I'm going to pass it over to you to give us some context for this conversation and to get it started.
Thank you very much, Grace, and welcome to everybody on the panel, and welcome to everybody who's dialed in. It's pretty simple. I guess the context here is pretty much where the industry finds itself at the moment. Angola is second largest producer in Africa. Pre-COVID, I think somewhere about 1.4 million barrels a day. And so just from that perspective, Angola is extremely important with respect to the industry in Africa, but also because it's an important member of OPEC. And so a lot of people across the continent look to Angola with respect to direction as to what is going to happen. Also, particularly because we have all the major players currently very active in Angola. So it's always some kind of a laboratory to be able to understand globally what is likely to happen within the industry. And so for us, it was very important to be able to speak to market participants, but also to be able to exchange, with the likes, Frederico Correia, or Frederico Costa, or also with Adilson, Paulo, to be able to get an understanding of the challenges which companies are facing on the ground. And so what we're going to try and do today is pretty much to tease that. And if at all we're going to leave with two things today, is to pretty much say, how do companies actually mitigate the effects of COVID nowadays in Angola, number one, in the oil and gas sector, and secondly, despite COVID, where are the opportunities? Whenever there are crises like these ones, what happens is that, opportunities also open for the brave and for people who can spot opportunities. And so the question here is, where are the opportunities in that sense among this, in this particular environment? And how can we share some of those ideas? So my first question would be to Frederico Martins. what have you seen in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on levels of, I would say, activity, and how are some of your clients coping with the difficulties that have come, from, first of all, from a cost perspective? I imagine there's a high pressure on the number of companies to deal with costs, given the low price of oil, but also HSE challenges around how companies are dealing with COVID-19 at the moment.
Okay, thank you. When we look to the industry itself, and starting from upstream, Angola is not facing a different challenge that all the global industry is facing. All the operators are challenging to reduce OPEX, and all the major oil and gas companies, common known as IOCs, have stopped or reanalyzed all the capex investments around the world. So based on that, what is happening with the industry in Angola is fully aligned with what we are seeing in the rest of the world. When we look to Angola itself, and we look to upstream, I would say that in the last 4 to 5 years, Angola was doing already a great progress around the local content. So I would say that if we look to this point, it's for example, COVID probably is an enabler to fast track the local content, because the problem of COVID is that we avoid the excess of people. So I would say that also in personnel on board around the platforms, the companies are trying to reduce the level of people that are on board. So I would, and we have restrictions to fly. So at the moment, the industry itself is doing their normal routines, and the level of production in Angola has not decreased based on the COVID itself. So I would say that for local context perspective, for example, it's an opportunity to continue to invest and to have more national people engaged and doing the key tasks in terms of operation maintenance around the upstream stuff. Of course, that the sentiment caused by COVID, and in parallel with this new crude oil downturn price, of course, that this impacts the industry itself. It impacts not only in Angola, it is an impact that we are facing globally. And what is the challenge now for any country that are in the top 20 as oil producers, like Angola it is now, is to try to put their self in a good shape around the regulation and the tax royalties to enable that for next license bids, or to push the actual companies, moreover the international companies that are playing in the country, to keep their operations going on, and probably to extend to their concessions for a longer periods. In terms of new fields, of course, that any bid now, it will suffer a bit, because worldwide the companies are pushing back their capex. But I would say that in terms of production, and considering the latest cuts done by OPEC in terms of conjunction production in OPEC group, Angola has the conditions to cope with their level and our expectations. I would say that the biggest challenge it will be after COVID, to grant that with the end of the lockdown globally, we all have some expectation that the consumption could ramp up a bit, and of course that this could push a bit the oil price in the international markets, and in the end try to do some positive signs to the globally industry itself. And of course, Angola, as a top 20 producer worldwide, will be engaged and will have some gain from that ramp up.
Thank you for that input. Adilson, my question to you would be, we've seen a number of governments, trying to halt layoffs due to COVID and the difficulties which we've seen. How do we keep more people on the payroll so that, post-COVID, service companies don't have to go and rehire? Have you had to let people go, or how are you dealing with that at the moment?
So thank you for the question. I think it's a very important question in times like this. So what we're trying to do with the clients is really try to come to an understanding of what costs are essential and what costs are not essential, so we can continue the business moving. And of course, layoffs always come to the table when challenges like this come, but it's not the first measure one can take. There are a lot of other measures you can take. The very first measure you need to take is to be proactive in reaching out to the client and come up with solutions on cost, right? Renegotiate the deals before you end up in a situation where the contract is actually canceled and therefore you need to lay off people. So you need to be very proactive in engaging the clients to find solutions on how to get the costs down. Number two is to perform. Okay, it's extremely important to make sure we perform seamlessly in when we have situations like this, because low performance actually have a huge impact in the cost of quality, right? So you don't want to have additional costs when you are in situations like this. And then ultimately, after you've gone through all the exercise looking at your supply chain, which is 70% of your cost, right? In industries like ours, after you've looked at 70% of your cost, which is supply chain, you then can look at the 30% of that, which is your manpower. And it's a very, I don't really like to have this kind of discussions. It's one of those discussions a leader has a must. It's always very painful to let people go. But we do that ultimately after we've gone through all the efforts to make sure we've gone to the minimum level of cost acceptable. And then that's when you start to discuss layoffs. In terms of government, I think Angolan government have been very proactive in taking some measures to address COVID, both economically and health-wise. There is still a couple of things that can be done in terms of the economy. I think it is about time for the government to renegotiate its public debt by negotiating a freeze on the service of the debt. That's extremely important. Also to restructure the debt, because they'll need more time actually to cope up with the pause they will be given in 2020. And review the budget, the annual budget. By reviewing the annual budget, I don't mean only to decrease the cost basis or the price basis of the oil in the budget, but I mean to reprioritize the project. Lately, when you look at the news, you see those programs of the municips, and I ask myself whether they would be critical in times like this. It's a time where the government needs to create all the bases to survive. So I think there are a couple of projects that can be postponed for a later stage and focus on addressing the health issues, helping companies, keeping people in the payroll with a tax break. Also, redirect the money being spent in some of those projects to social assistance, because there are families that have lost job in the lockdown, that are families that cannot sell in the lockdown. So it's important for money in the budget that was directed to projects that are non-essential be redirected to the survival of these people. And then with the renegotiation of the budget, of the debt, Angola will have a lot of room for addressing COVID, because 60% of the budget, of the Angolan budget, is allocated to the public debt. So you see only 60% of that. So only 40% was allocated for new spend or other spends. And this is where the government needs to be strategic in posing up this debt and make sure he can use this 60% that was initially allocated for that to address COVID in tax break, giving tax break for companies to keep people in the payroll, as I've said, and also with social assistance. I think that's critical.
Well, thank you on that. Frederico Costa, I think you have a unique perspective being the CEO of Technip, the CFO, sorry, of Technip. And what I wanted to know from you is, how what measures you guys have been taking with respect to cost control, which of course is popping up, like Adilson was saying, is becoming extremely important, but also looking at the FX situation in the country, something which a lot of investors from outside are always looking at with respect to coming into Angola or playing in Angola. The currency moving against the dollar or against the kwanza in that sense is always a major cause for concern. I would agree with Adilson that the government has been in recent times quite proactive in trying to address that. What do you think is the current situation, and how can companies try and mitigate those difficulties at the moment, given the price of oil and of course the reducing reserves?
So first of all, not sure if you can hear me very well. Hope the internet is stable. So regarding the FX part, really we saw starting in 2018 a lot of fiscal reforms from the government, and we have seen at the beginning of this year very positive signs that situation would improve. So mainly the BNA, the central bank, has liberalized the FX currency. It allowed the banks to freely trade with the ICOs, so the international oil operators. And for the first quarter, things were moving in a very positive position. So we were having levels that were not seen since the big crisis of 2014, and things were improving. And it was really a very good answer to the market and to foreign investments. Unfortunately, end of the Q1 and beginning of Q2, we had the COVID. So basically the COVID, the main issue that it has is the uncertainty. So right now, every forecast or every provision is, it's worth what it's worth. So we can't really attach to it. And we have seen the FX law really taking a tumble. So in terms of this liberalization also, there was this opportunity and the government took very good steps in trying to put the FX sales or the FX derivatives on the international markets, mainly through Bloomberg, through the FX Go platform. However, there was some constraints also because of the ICOs not being enrolled. So we saw in April and we are seeing in May really a big shortage of currency, of FX currency. And also what we are going to see that we didn't see on Q1 and will have a good impact is the market being flooded by kwanzas, because a lot of services company, international companies, they were able to hedge their products, mainly through treasury bonds. And most of these treasury bonds, close to 60 to 70% of the treasury bonds that are currently within the market are due for this year. So we will see a very big influx of kwanzas that will not be offset by effects available on the market due to this constraint. So we will see inflation, unfortunately. We will have to see the government has to come up with solutions to bring back investment, or at least to assure that the foreign investors are able to capitalize on their investments, or to be an attractive country to invest. We are currently now, and the COVID has also put the companies, as Frederico said very well, the companies are reviewing their capex costs. They are choosing very, very diligent where they are going to invest their money, where is less risk associated, and where is more return on investment. And right now we are facing, Angola is facing two major competitors, mainly the pre-salt in Brazil and the new exploration in Guyana, that if the government doesn't take a step forward, trying to get FX, trying to get good conditions, even if necessary tax breaks, we could see some potential disinvestment in Angola to go to other countries. As for cost savings, really, so it is within the company. We have all the companies within the oil and gas have been hit, and we are looking mainly here in Angola to go along with the strategy of all the multinational corporates. So Angola, as it was stated by Frederico in the beginning, really hasn't taken a very deep turn within the production. So the costs associated, or the cuts from OPEC, will be in the round of 20-25%. So this equates to 300 to 400 barrels per day. So it's less revenue that will come. However, given other locations, it is not a very, very high cut. So the cost savings, we have to do it. So it is mandatory, of course, for all we have to adapt to this organization. However, being in a multinational company, I have been more concerned with some other colleagues from other countries or from other locations that are very much within the cuts and layoffs and all the respective downturn in that. So Angola, fortunately, is being a little bit spared on this, even in terms of production, in terms of investment. So most of the projects ongoing are still ongoing, even though they are delayed. So the 2 or 3 big projects worth more than $2 billion are being delayed for 1 to 2 years. So that is a major constraint. However, they have not been cancelled, and this is very positive. And the government has to capitalize on that, and has to bring investment and bring attractive conditions to the market, so that we can move on to it.
Okay, thank you on that. Moving on from that, Sergio, what are you getting in the market? You know, Frederico Costa was just talking about some of the projects actually just being delayed but not being cancelled in that sense, and that in as much as it's difficult, it seems to him from his comparison of other countries that Angola is probably in a better situation than in some other countries. Despite COVID and, you know, the price drop, where are you seeing opportunities in the market for Angola? So where are you seeing opportunities, for example, for local companies who can be able to take advantage of that?
Well, Verner, thank you for that. I hope everybody can hear me. I always like to talk about the positive outlook, and I think it's important in the way that in the world that we're living today, that we tackle the negative sentiment for investment. And you know, we hear all around what's going on, and we all know what the situation is. But I think it would be very important now just to do a quick recap of where we were, let's say 2.5 years ago, and where we are today, and what basis we have to be able to mitigate and find these opportunities. So as everybody knows, at the end of 2017, Angola went through a dramatic change. You know, we changed presidents, we changed the way things were done, a lot of positive changes. One of the main ones in the oil and gas, at least, was removing of the concessionaire responsibility from Sonangol and creating an oil and gas agency. Okay, that was done primarily from it was after a meeting, let's say, between the operators and the new administration, and they sat together and thought about what ways they can come together and create a good environment to make the industry start to grow or revive it. So that happened, you know, under the president and the new minister Diamantino. The industry was reshaped, and we had the agency, and Sonangol entered into what they've been already trying to do prior to 2017, but they became more aggressive in it, which is their regeneration or restructuring thing. So what the chamber did at that moment was interact with the government and be able to create a platform in the shape of a conference that we organized, which was to attract investors from outside, quality investment, but also get a platform for the local players to be able to look at things in a different way and take advantage of what was being presented to the market by the new agency. That specifically was a bid round that was done. It was also the presentation of a program for bid rounds, successive bid rounds for the next 5 years, where they aligned investment opportunities for companies that created, let's say, predictability. So companies could look at the next 5 to 7 years and look at what are the opportunities that are coming and align their strategies towards that. So all of that was done. All of that was done when the market conditions were kind of bearish. We can admit that, you know, it wasn't a bullish situation. Bullish perhaps for the United States, where production was ramping up. You know, the US became a net exporter. You know, their economy, their oil and gas industry was expanding, while the rest of the world was trying to create, and OPEC and its members create a narrative and put up conditions to be able to attract investment. The chamber latched onto that, and we have been working with African governments, trying to attract investment from Asia, from Europe, from the United States, to be able to look at this change of narrative and be able to attract quality investment. So having had already a bearish, bearish sentiment into the market, you add the accelerant of COVID, let's call it an accelerant. You know, it just puts everything to create a tumble. So this is the situation that we live in today. But as Verner said in the beginning of this webinar, these kind of situations bring opportunities. Opportunities for the local players, opportunities for the local service companies, opportunities for service companies that can latch on to the opportunities created by the IOCs. And the IOCs themselves are looking for opportunities. Let's talk about, for example, Uganda. Look at what Total did. Let's talk about what some of the IOCs in Angola are doing towards trying to accelerate the gas drive, because there are opportunities in relation to other industries that can come out of the gas. Those are the things. We had a bid round that was planned for this year. It was actually announced in the newspaper for companies to come up with you know, like a pre-consultation process for that. And I think the agency was always clear from the beginning, and they presented it at the oil conference that happened last year, that there are, regardless of the normal bid processes, they're always open for direct negotiations. So there are opportunities such as onshore. I'm sure that now with the lower costs in services, a lot of countries are taking opportunities for lower risk plays, such as onshore. Marginal fields is something that has been looked at for a while. There's been a lot of talk about gas production and gas monetization and integration of Angola with other African markets. So there are a lot of opportunities. I know that Angola was at some stage, and it was publicly announced at some stage, negotiating to do some kind of joint cooperation with Namibia, with Zambia, with Congo on gas and fuel. So there are a lot of opportunities, Verner, and actually I cannot go on without mentioning, Sonangol published, I think it was 2 weeks ago, an open process to sell off some of its subsidiaries. I think there was like 9 or 10 or 15 subsidiaries, which opens up for opportunity. There's a good deal to be done. There are opportunities there, and I'm sorry, but at the chamber we say we like to make money. And we're very bullish about this. So I hope it answers your question, Verner.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on a last point. We can't forget that once the president came to power and the MPLA came to power, they issued a PND. So it's a National Plan of Development. The National Plan of Development highlighted very clearly what are the priorities for the government. And the priorities are primarily initiatives to mitigate the decrease in production, okay? So what happens now is that we are having companies reorganize themselves, manage cost better. So there's opportunity to reorganize, streamline operations, manage cost in Angola, which is what is happening. Adilson, I think, touched on it. There's a lot of those things, and that allows for us to look at what we can do coming on to 2021. So I think this is kind of a highlight, Verner. We can go in deeply into more of the specifics, but that's my view.
I want to build up a little bit on what Sergio has said.
Yes,
I always call people into cautious, which is, COVID will go away. It will hit and have hit the world very hard, but it will go away. And we need to remain calm in times like this so we don't lose sight of what is really critical and what is strategic. Because in times like this, companies offers governments a lot of good deals, so to say. They look good because the forecast is that the economy is looking bad, and therefore people take opportunity and advantage of moment like this to negotiate best deals possible, right? Because you don't know what is coming ahead. And as Frederico said, the main issue here is uncertainty. So let's remain calm and look at what can we control as companies, as governments. We can control how we perform. We can control what costs we can and we cannot incur. And as governments, we can control our budget. We can review our budget to the minimum possible. We can address social assistance, but you cannot control what the oil price will be tomorrow. Even though today I've looked at the oil price and it was looking good, because with the cuts in supply and the rise in demand, that's what we will be seeing for the next times coming, because the more and more demand is ramping up with the economies open themselves up. So instead of rushing into a deal now, because of the uncertainty that is coming tomorrow, and you have opportunities of deals on top of your table, take a deep breath and do what you can control for now, and you can, let some of these decisions for 2 months from now and 3 months from now. I think the main objective for 2020 is survive. Okay, that's the main objectives companies will need to deal with, and governments will need to deal with. How can we survive? That's what the main objective. But COVID will go away, and there will be a post-COVID, and we need to be ready for that. But we need to be calm in times like this.
Adilson, I just want to say something. Rather than how to survive, I think the most important is not how the industry will rebound or what can be done, because there are things that can be done, and we can go into those specifically, but is how to remove the unpredictability, because the unpredictability is what is scaring everybody. And that is the one that we have to challenge. And the Chamber advocates for things that we can propose to be able to do that. And we've been doing it across Africa, across the different geographies that we work with. And removing the unpredictability will be giving us an opportunity to manage and plan and look at the positive outlook.
Frederico, I go back to you there. I think Frederico Martins, of course, sorry. We have two Fredericos here, so I always have to make sure that I call the second name. I think what is coming out here is, of course, the unpredictable nature of the business environment. Of course, that is something that hits everybody in the industry. So from your perspective, sitting where you're sitting and looking at the number of different companies, in terms of best practice, what should local companies, and it's important to also always make the differentiation between local companies and international companies, because I think international companies have a bigger breadth, particularly the majors who are in petrochemicals, who have a downstream, huge across the world. It's different, it's diversified in that sense. So it's a little bit easier for them to be able to deal with that. But if at all you're looking at, a mid-sized Angolan company in that sense, how do they deal with this unpredictability? How do they keep people on the payroll? Because at the end of the day, the industry prices might go up and come down. What is important is that people need to be able to stay in jobs, and the economy needs to be able to continue going. So what is your advice in that sense to a mid-sized company, basically looking out or seeing contracts being canceled in that sense, and which doesn't quite understand the price dynamics and can't do anything about the price of oil, as has just been said?
Okay, just before progress with your this question, just to complement what Adilson and Sergio has said, I would say that if I was asked to do a matrix around the opportunities in Angola, I would say that the local companies have a lot of opportunities around the onshore production to take over some brownfields that in the past were operated by IOCs. The IOCs probably could ramp up a bit and get a more interesting project finance, playing some role in the margin fields. And there is some expectation from the agency that the international oil companies that are operating huge blocks that could extend their production for some marginal fields, and that it will bring some extra production. And in 1 to 2 years, probably the IOCs will be keen also to bid new fields once the COVID has gone, like Adilson said. So the outlook itself, and I would like to remember that the cut that has been applied by OPEC is not a flat one. Okay, so for the next 4 months, Angola can produce and launch in the OPEC group 1.1 million barrels per day, and the 4 months later on 1.2, and in the beginning of 2021 could come again to 1.34. So the level of production that we are authorized to do is the level of production that we are doing right now. So the point now is to maximize the profit, and that brings us to your question now: how to decrease the unpredictability. So of course that for the IOC it's a bit more easier because the portfolio is so huge that you could leverage a bit your resources among the portfolio you have, and even more if you are in the full value chain, you could try to integrate a bit more your supply chain routines to get some profit from that. For companies, the more local companies that are playing the market and that could not, in fact, they could not influence these topics. So the unique thing that they could do is to react on that. I would say that these companies, what should invest first thing is to try to maximize their local content, and that brings the companies to a second topic, that is, once they have expert people on board, they should have in top of mind knowledge transfer program, a solid knowledge transfer program that enables that the local people acquire the proper routines, the proper skills to deliver the job. And of course, when we are doing a job and you can avoid several expenses like trip, tax equalization, hotels, extra accommodation, you will become more profitable. Another thing that I think we could apply is that among all the industry and among the country, at least among us that we are here in this webinar now, that we dress more a position of partner. We should partner with. So what I mean with partner with is try to create contracts based with that have a baseline that could cope with the costs of the companies, but on top we could have some success fee that is a compromise that shows our level of engagement between companies, between the supplier and, for example, an IOC that is hiring Adilson company, for example, so, or even Frederico, Costa. So if we try to equalize among a group of suppliers this partnership relationship, we will avoid a lot of uncertainty, because we could try to bring to the group the best each one can do and try to leverage several things like expenses, common costs, apply, for example, for some common back office work among some companies, in order to try to keep focus each company in the things that they do properly. So for me, the top of mind in each company at this moment is to have a proper knowledge transfer program between experts and local content, push national people to assume responsibilities and to assume new top roles to drive the business, and try to shake hands and try to get more partnership relationship between several suppliers and the players.
Frederico, Costa, before I go to you, Grace, and then allow some questions to come in from the public, I just want to pick up from what Frederico Martins was talking about and ask Frederico, because Frederico Martins seems to be saying local content is good for cost control if you do it properly. You know, so what are your thoughts from some of the figures that I've seen in Angola? And I'm a local content guy all the way, you know. I want to see the next, you know, the next batch of young Angolian millionaires and billionaires, you know, who are coming out of the oil industry. We need that, you know, we need that. And my question to you, of course, is what are your thoughts? You are looking at it, you know, from a CFO perspective, local content, you know, being good for business. From some of the figures I've seen, about 40%, 30 to 40% somewhat of, you know, labor that is still being used. You can say specialized labor in that sense that is still being used in the oil and gas sector in Angola is from expatriates. What are your thoughts on being able to reduce that, you know, to might be, you know, 10% in that sense and enable Angolan companies to take advantage of that?
So it is a very, very good question. It was not on purpose. I believe it was last week that this was a very, very interesting article on the local newspaper, on the national newspaper, about the Angolanization processes. So according to the law that has a couple of years, that brings this transfer know-how, as Frederico Martins was saying, this transfer of know-how from expats that was not moving as swift as maybe the government and all ourselves Angolans would have liked. But at this moment, most of the oil operators have very high Angolanization rates. So we are saying for the major five, we are looking at close to 85 to 90% of the positions are already provided by Angolan nationals. The industry in itself in Angola, also counting with services, are close to 70%. Like you said, there is this margin of 30% that honestly I truly believe that the COVID will push forward. So one of the major, or some of the major AJC initiatives that most of the oil operators and even the foreign services providers have done at the beginning of the COVID was really the reallocation of all the expats for safety reasons. And as such, it brought some room to a more Angolanization processes. So things are going, honestly, and here, not going too much of publicity, but our group, our company is close to 100%, even on the board of administration of Angolan nationals. So we are not, I would not say a case study, but we have really applied for the past 15 years for this Angolanization. I was not here at the time, fortunately, but the people that were really did a very, very good job. And at this moment, not only was Angolanization, but something that I also like to reinforce, even the positions, the operations positions and the country management or something are being awarded to our colleagues, our female colleagues. So there are a lot of initiatives going on. We've seen some support from the oil ministry, and the COVID will speed up that process. I really believe that even though, and if I might add, it might look countersense because now with the COVID we see a lot of no commuting and homework or working from home. So working from home can be beneficial for expats since they can work from anywhere, close, but we are seeing completely the opposite. So companies want to invest in the local talent. They want people that are over there, and it is a cost-saving measure. Angola, there is a lot of reports. Angola is still one of the most expensive cities in the world for expats. That in itself allows, and some ICOs have, I don't have access because it's confidential information in itself, but most of the ICOs, their expats package is higher when coming to Angola than for all other countries. So they are investing in local contents. and they are trying to do the share knowledge. However, also I would like to say, and given the experience of a company that is almost 100% national, that this process is a process that takes a long time. So to have in administrative positions like Adilson, like Sergio, even at Deloitte, that I work a lot with Deloitte and all the big fours, to have very good know-how on the executive positions, it takes 10 to 15 years at least of training, of putting people with international experience, with international, that we see a lot of Angolans coming with from international very high reputation universities and with very good courses, and this is an ongoing project. So I see, as I spoken, close to 70% of the oil and gas industry is already national, and we are looking for the next 2 to 3 years of an added 10 to 15%. So I don't think we'll go to 90 until 2025 maybe. But by 2022, 23, we can be at 80%, which is very, very good and in line, at least I speak for my company, in line with what these international companies have in other countries.
Okay, Grace, you want to go ahead with some questions from the public?
I do. Yes, we've got a lot of really good questions coming in. Also, before I ask, I just want to remind members of the media, please do press the button to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question at the end of this session. So we have quite a few questions here. I think first we can ask, and perhaps this is a follow-up to Mr. Correia's comments on different cost-saving strategies. Unfortunately, layoffs have been a part of that. Are there any laws in Angola restricting companies from laying off employees due to COVID? And also, what are the legal implications on temporarily suspending employment contracts until things improve?
To me?
If you'd like to answer the question or open it to the rest of the panel.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I would say the emergency declaration, the decree itself prevents company from firing people, because the decree is actually the legal ground for the state of emergency measures. What you can and what you can't do is actually in the decree, and there is, I think, prohibition. I haven't gone deep dive into that, but there's prohibition on firing people during the state of emergency because of COVID. There's no specific law other than the decrees itself to regulate what you can and what you can't do.
Yeah,
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like that. And so the law is designed to protect the employment, at least during the state of emergency, and I have to say that the government in Angola was pretty fast to put some topics to help the companies on the table. It has already launched several lines to support and to help the companies. Of course, that not all the topics can be applied to every company, but any company has capacity to ask for some help in certain topics. So I would say that to all the people that is attending the webinar, to screen what is launched by the government, because for sure they will find some interesting support for some topics that, of course, that will not solve the impacts from COVID, but will leverage at least a recover program for the next coming months.
Thank you. And the next question is as well posed to the panel. When you talk about the wealth of opportunities that remain in Angola, what is the time frame we're looking at in terms of how long it's going to take for the market to rebound and for oil prices to stabilize post-COVID-19?
I would like to start by addressing this one by saying the following. I think the main opportunity we have ahead of us in terms of Angolans and the government is to review its strategy, because there is a lot done in terms of the ground and policies landscape to attract foreign investments. But Angola needs to look at three strategic objectives I think Angola have. Number one is its national security. Number two is Angolans' intent to attract private investments. And number three is Angola's need to diversify its economy. And there are 5 key pillars linked to these 3 main objectives. It is the revenues, meaning source of return. Angola is heavily dependent on oil, and still in the oil sector, it can be diversified. So today, investing in downstream is no longer I would say a simple priority, is the main priority Angola has, because as a matter of national security, you can't continue to rely on importation for you to have fueling your industries, your car. You know, you need to have it localized, and that's one of the key, I think, areas where Angola needs still to heavily invest. So it's a matter of political, it's a matter of national security risk, the downstream sector. It's a matter of diversifying the economy, and it's a matter of attracting foreign investors. As an investor, you don't want to rely, you don't want to be staying 3 weeks fighting for fuel when you have your industries to produce whatever you need to produce to put out at the market. So that's key for Angola. The second key pillar is agriculture. So we've heard 2 weeks ago that Angola has 3 months of food storage. I mean, as an investor, if I'm listening to this, then I'm asking myself, so what will happen after 3 months? Okay, so you need to be able to stop depending 60% on the importation for you to feed yourself, and you need to be able to produce at the minimum 60 to 80% of what you consume needs to be produced internally. And that's actually a source of revenue, because you can always sell the excedent of what you produce in terms of agriculture. Okay, and as an investor, it works perfectly for national security. It works perfectly for diversifying the economy because it becomes a source of revenue, but it also works perfectly with attracting foreign investment, because investors look at how can I survive, how can I send people over, how can I feed employees if they're out there. They don't want to be looking at that just for the next 3 months. They want it to be strategic. The third one, I would say, will be infrastructure with power and water. You don't want to be building cars somewhere in Angola while relying on tanks of water. You want the water supply to be steady and you want it to be stable. So those are some of the key areas where Angola really needs to take the opportunity of COVID to rethink on how to address them, because it really plays along with the national security interests of Angola, the need to diversify its economy, but also with the attraction of foreign investments. Yeah.
If I may, Grace, also to
Yes,
pick it up from Adilson, and what I see a lot of here on the chat, a lot of questions, or the $1 million question, as they speak about the oil prices. So to give here an overview to all the attendees, when I talked in the beginning of uncertainty, is because to put it in perspective, close to 70% of all the oil production in the world goes to transportation. So this means that when right now the ICOs, and I saw the results from Equinor and from Shell cutting dividends for the first time almost ever, and also from our side as a services provider, is that what the COVID really is putting the challenge on the industry and the uncertainty is how transportation will come. And transportation, not only on the commute, because working from home is starting, and I think this is one of the positive sides of the COVID, is really as advanced society, or at least work a couple of years, if not decades, of putting infrastructure for people to be able to work from home with all the benefits in terms of commuting, in terms of even of a sense of life, of being able to do the own schedule, but also on the transportation in terms of flights. So the big issue of the COVID and in terms of the oil price is how the flights and the aviation will really proceed after the COVID. So will it rebound back or not? Because over there is really where the oil demand is going. And what we are seeing is that we are seeing a very low demand as of now, close to 25% less than what we had pre-COVID, and this takes a lot of impact on the market. However, to counterbalance that or to offset that, we have the shale production in the States. So the shale production in the States, I believe, is really what will define, at least in the short to medium term, how the oil price will bounce back, because the shale industry is not profitable at these rates that we have between the 20, 25, even going to 30 or $35 per barrel. So the shale, if it doesn't recover as it did in 2014, that was able for a short period of time to get between the 20s and the 30s and bounce back and really took off from there. So we saw that the shale survived this big test because there was demand also. So it was able to use the supply that it had to the demand. However, given the COVID, if we don't see the same demand, then the shale industry is going maybe for very difficult times and maybe shutting down almost completely, especially in the United States. And this in itself will really raise the prices. I've seen this week some reports from very reputable firms and agencies that is still very much possible that oil price could reach 100 by the end of the year, given that the demand will, even though it will cut to 20-25%, but the supply, especially the shale, will erase almost all the balance of the market. So it is very uncertain, and we have the shale and especially the aviation industry as the main catalyzers for how the price will go.
So if I can just give a stab to this point, seeing that everybody has said something quick, just a quick one. I'm not for trying to guess or how things are going to be. I'm more for looking at the facts. And the fact is that it seems to me there is no global coordinated effort to really tackle this as a whole world together. It seems everybody's in their corner doing their thing. And to me, that tells me that each government should look in-house and look at what are the specific opportunities that they have and find the best way to address those and present those to the market, to the investors, local, international. There are people still looking internationally. I mentioned the Uganda deal for Total. What caused Total to pull the trigger was obviously the timing, and the timing brought the opportunity. So what I'm saying is that Angola needs to look inwards and look at legislation, what legislation it can do, change, improve, promote, to get people to continue to take a punt, continue to be there, new guys, new people perhaps listening to this, come into Angola, have a look at Angola. Like I said, the agency under the leadership of Ingeniero Paulino Geronimo has taken the action of putting itself open to the world via their website and via their email, and people can still interact through the internet with the agency. Let's talk about Angola looking at presenting its low-hanging fruit. Angola and as many African countries, they're very bountiful with opportunities and resources. When you're walking in the field and you see a tree full of mangoes, which mango are you gonna go for first? You're gonna go for the lowest hanging mango. the one that looks ripe. So presenting the low-hanging fruit and the best opportunity for people to come and invest. There's been a lot of talk prior to COVID about regional integration and regional investment, promotion of regional cooperation. So there's opportunity there. We have the IOCs in Angola who are also present in other regional geographies. There is opportunity for that. To touch to Adilson, you know, agriculture, yes, fertilization plants, very good opportunity to put together. You know, I think that companies such as ENI and other companies present in the gas consortium, they are looking at these opportunities. So, you know, things like making visas easier, making travel easier, making procedures for the oil workers easier. You know, these are the things that African countries are looking at to make it more attractive. So I think in summary, just to summarize, yes, we don't know, it's unpredictable, but what can we do in Angola to be able to dress up these opportunities and people continue to spend? The world hasn't stopped, money is flowing. But how can you get the money to come there, to come to us? You know, as I said, and I continue to say, you know, and NJ Ayuk says we like money, we like to promote money. Let's create opportunities and dress them for the money to come. And I think that will just create opportunities for local content. And by the way, touching on local content, I'd like to make a very clear distinction because this has touched me for the last 12 years in Angola. There is local content and there's local participation, because what Verner talks about is millionaires owning their oil fields and millionaires owning their local companies versus Angolans having high quality, good paid, technical or non-technical jobs in the oil industry, you know, from the service companies to, you know, reservoir engineers and geologists. So those two are two separate things. They're intertwined but separate, and there are opportunities for all of those. And I think all we have to do is design and dress and make it look good so that the opportunists or the investment, the quality investment can continue to come.
I'm glad you touched this point just a few minutes there, Verner, because the one key issue we will find across all the industries and sectors of the economy in Angola is supply chain. If you look at the oil and gas production, right, where does the services and goods that support the oil and gas production in Angola comes from? It's 80% from either foreign companies or of goods that were manufactured or produced outside of the country, right? So if you go to downstream, it's also the same. You don't even have a downstream industry. You have distribution, but what are you really distributing? It is things you are importing, right? Once again, the supply chain is outside. You do the same in agriculture. So what you're selling at the stores is, again, the supply chain is outside. So I think as we speak about local content and the local participation in the next group of millionaires out of Angola, we need to start to look at where the opportunity is now. I want oil and gas producers to be Angolans. I want companies that really are owned by Angolans to produce oil. But I want these companies to tackle where the opportunities are first, which is in the supply chain. And that will come with the local content policies, by enforcing local content policies, but not only enforcing, but make capital available for companies to, you know, start new businesses, to fulfill the gap in the supply chain. Where is the problem is, okay? If I want to compete with an IOC today, I will probably not be able to do it as a local oil producer. So will I start there? No, I will start to provide service to this IOC. And that means supply chain. So 80% of the supply chain of this industry still come from outside. Let's make sure that we can shift the balance towards locally. And then we can start to talk about oil and gas producers being nationals, right? I think that's the right step forward. And we do the same within the other industries, whether in agriculture, whether in the downstream industry. We need to be able to depend on the Angolan market to produce the level of services and goods that are needed for those industries to move forward. That's the very first step when it comes to local content and billionaires coming from Angola.
Thank you very much on that one. I just go now a quick closing round. I'm conscious of time and the fact that people have to move on to other things. Frederico, Costa, going forwards, taking advantage of opportunities going forwards in that sense, what would be, I would say, if at all you were talking to a potential investor looking at getting into Angola, you know, what should they be looking at in terms of what makes it easy to be able to make money in Angola from your perspective?
So first of all, and I'm sorry if I'm going to be a little biased on this, but on the financial, I think the most important and really what we have to look forward in terms of the government is to understand, and I think this is also comes from a clash of mentality. You have to understand that a foreign investor, he comes here to Angola to invest, but his main goal is the profit. So no one comes here for charity, they come here for profit. And to be able to have profit, he is also able to export this profit. So the main issue, there are two main issues. So I'll go first on the financial part. So on the financial part, the government has to be very clear and has to really step up the FX situation. So we can't have the devaluation that we have now. It's not attractive when someone comes to this country or is looking forward to this country, and then he sees the struggle that they have exporting the capital. So this is really one of the major focus. The other one that Adilson touched 2 or 3 times, and I very much appreciate that, and going forward, is the infrastructure. So for the international investor to come here to Angola, he has to be able to have a supply chain that really he can afford and it can use here in Angola. And the big issue that I see here in Angola, from my perspective and other services provider, is that the lack of infrastructures really constrains the pricing. So what we see is that, from experience, not only in my company that has industry, that has a factory here, that is the only one in Africa, of umbilicals, but also from the other supply chain that we buy locally, is that the pricing sometimes is not competitive, because when you have to take in accounting the oil that you have to do to the generator to produce electricity, that in other countries is almost free. When you take in consideration the water that you have to produce, that you have to buy outside. So it doesn't make competitiveness. So to really push for an investor right now, we have to take infrastructures to allow prices to go down, especially the local content, be able to produce at prices that are competitive. And also, and once again, I think the government has this knowledge and know-how. However, it's not always bad to reinforce. We have to understand that foreign investors, they come here to do profit. They don't come for charity. So they must be able to return back the profit that they will come. Because when you have profit, when you export profit, you bring other companies, you bring other investors, you bring other foreign investors. And the profit in itself, it doesn't mean that all the money or all the revenue goes outside. It means only part of the profit, because the other part will stay here to expand the economy, to be able to use on infrastructures, to be able to develop local content, and to be able even to pay taxes. So the government has to work for it. The privatization we are not able to discuss here, but the privatization of most of the Sonangol participations is going underway. We are seeing some positives. We are seeing some foreign investors really interested in and buying a couple of companies. So this privatization is working, but once again, as long as the investors know that this is a safe country, that there is no risk associated with infrastructures and with exporting capital.
Final word, Frederico Martins.
Sorry, Frederico Costa, I just want to say something there. I think what you set up there is an opportunity for us to challenge the local banks to be able to play a greater role in the oil industry. And maybe you can make a comment on that as well.
No, I agree with you, Sergio. And as I said in the beginning, really the new FX law and the liberalization, it came with very positive results. We saw a Q1 that was very, very positive, gave great indications to the market, and the government now must capitalize on that. So we have seen, as I told you, the FX Go, that is the Bloomberg platform. We saw also in the beginning, it didn't work because sometimes you try. It didn't work. We have seen in the last month low appreciation of the currency because it was the foreign panel of Bloomberg and international sponsors that were guiding the Kwanza. However, now that we came back to supply demand, there was a big devaluation. So the market is starting to work. So we have seen liberalization. The IOCs are really being able to sell it, but once again, they can only sell what they are going to need. So once supply chain management national. So the international oil companies, they have to have goods and services to buy locally. Otherwise, they will not bring their own currency to here. They will not sell to the market. So this is the steps. On financial, I think the government is really taking good steps. The COVID really took a downturn because things were improving, and now the government has to look into what can or cannot do about it. So if necessary, going to the reserves. I speak once again bias on the oil and gas. I know that we have medication, we have basic needs, we have basic goods that also have to be prioritized because the country is really struggling on those matters. However, it's very hard to bring foreign investors right now to those markets. So the oil and gas is still the industry that moves the country in terms of exportation, and it has to take a really big approach from the government on that stance.
Okay.
Just picking up what Frederico was saying and the point that Sergio brought to the discussion, I would like to share, I don't know if all the people are aware, and probably our attendees in the webinar know, that the local banks, local commercial banks, are now working with the ERDP. ERDP is the Institute for Derivatives. So looking to the downstream part of the value chain, and they are working together to have more lines of investment, loans to local players to develop business around storage and distribution. Of course, that considering the level of investment, the capex in upstream is huge, of course. So it will be a bit tough to the local commercial banks to climb in the value chain to support the major upstream capex projects, but to support the downstream projects is already being done some work. And that is critical, because one thing that could push to a better standards level in the industry in Angola is to have a more integrated value chain, not only in the oil and gas, but also in other sectors, because unfortunately, actually, in Angola, we don't have a lot of integrated value chains. But for example, if the oil and gas could launch the trend, and of course that in Angola, the oil and gas industry is also obligated to launch good trends because is the biggest chunk in terms of contribution to the state budget, and still be the state of the art in terms of standardization. I would like to share with the people that is with us that the local commercial banks are doing this effort to support investments in companies, local companies that are working now to the industry. Of course, that is more focused in downstream, exactly because the level of capacity they have to enable loans are more linked to downstream, but it is also a sign that altogether we could do some progress.
Thank you.
My final words will be, look, every time you speak about investors and foreign investments, there are two things that come to the table. Am I able to expand my revenues, right? That's what Frederico Costa said. And the second thing is Angola is too expensive. If you listen to foreign investor when speaking about Angola, is always, I can't expand my revenue and Angola is too expensive. So that will come down again to the investments that need to be done in downstream. That investment will of course reduce the cost of the diesel and all the derivatives because it's produced in both locally, but also will enable the government to save money. They will stop buying oil to import oil. Okay, that's extremely critical that the government does it. So it's critical. The downstream, the investments on the refineries is no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when it needs to happen. Okay, so, and also the agriculture part of that, as I was speaking about, it is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it needs to happen. So those are the really two critical projects I think the government needs to launch in able to attract more investment, because in terms of the legal background, everything was done, the agency and all those kind of things were done. But companies, even the ones here in Angola today, the IOCs and others, if they will continue to invest, they want those questions to be answered. You know, they want what is the cost of living will be, and in the cost of living you have the fuels of the cars, you have the meals of the kids, and you know the cost of the power, the infrastructure cost. So those costs needs to come down, and they will require special attention of the government to be invested in, so that they can come down and they can be an attraction to the investors.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you all for your final comments and for participating in this panel. Mr. Costa, Mr. Correia, Mr. Paulo, and Mr. Pugliese. We have reached the end of this webinar. Thank you all for tuning in and for being such an active audience and submitting your questions. Thank you very much to Verner for moderating. Before we sign off, I have a few quick announcements. First of all, the second annual Angola Oil and Gas Conference and Exhibition is going to be held in Luanda later this year. So October 14th to 15th. Please visit africaoilandpower.com for more information and to register. We'd love to see you there. Again, you'll be able to find a video of today's session on our YouTube channel, AOP's YouTube channel. And finally, please visit aopwebinars.com to register for future upcoming webinars. We have a South Sudan webinar on May 25th, as well as a renewables webinar on the 28th of May. And we look forward to seeing you there as well. So yeah, in the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are located, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.
Obrigada. Bye-bye.
Stay positive.
Yes.
Stay home.
Not COVID positive. Stay positive.
Stay home. Bye.
Take care.